My name is Olivia Carter, and last winter at my father's 70th birthday party, he called me an uneducated nobody in front of our entire family and told me to get out of his house. I had quietly paid their mortgage when they were behind, covered my mother's surgery bills, and even put my brother's kids through private school. But in that moment, none of it mattered. I was nothing but a dropout in his eyes. You see, I didn't just build a company, I built it from the dust and the long nights no one saw. Over 15 years, I turned a one-bedroom apartment operation into American Artisan Collective, a nationwide platform that connects small-town craftspeople with buyers across the country. We ship hand-woven rugs from New Mexico, pottery from the Carolinas, and forged steelwork from rural Pennsylvania. Last year alone, our sales crossed $25 million. But that night, surrounded by people who had benefited from my success without knowing it, my father looked at me like I was an intruder. And maybe I should have seen it coming. The truth is, my family never respected my path. They believed in one road, only college degree, real job, retirement plan. My brother became an engineer, my sister a school principal. Me, I was the black sheep who sold knickknacks online. The sting of that night still burns, but it also forced me to confront a truth I'd been avoiding. I'd been buying their acceptance with my silence and my money. And when I stopped hiding, when I dared to speak my truth, they rejected it. If you've ever been dismissed or underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you most, you know the ache. You know that strange mix of hurt and clarity that sets in when the mask drops. And maybe you also know that quiet voice that says you don't have to keep proving yourself to them. I'm going to tell you exactly how I got here, how I went from a restless kid in Kansas with a taste for business to running a multi-million-dollar company to being cast out of the family I thought I was helping hold together. This isn't a simple story of success. It's about pride, betrayal, and learning to choose self-respect over approval. And if you've ever been caught in that same storm, torn between your truth and the comfort of being accepted, then I want you to stay with me. If you've ever felt underestimated by your own family, leave a like, and let's walk through this together. This journey might change the way you see your own story. I grew up in a quiet town in Kansas, where the streets rolled flat for miles, the winters were dry and bitter, and the rules for life were laid out like railroad tracks, parallel, predictable, and not to be crossed. My father, George Carter, had worked for the same manufacturing plant since before I was born, clocking in every day at 6:45 a.m., and returning at 5:15 p.m. sharp. He believed in one path to respectability. You go to college, you get a steady job, you collect your pension, and you keep your head down. My mother, Ellen, was a librarian at the public school and quietly reinforced those ideas, often reminding me that security comes from doing things the right way. From the outside, we looked like the picture-perfect middle-class family. My brother Michael was a straight-A student who joined the debate team. My sister Claire excelled in volleyball and the student council. Both of them wore their academic achievements like badges that earned nods of approval at family dinners. I, on the other hand, was the kid who couldn't sit still in a classroom. I was the one who stayed up past midnight with a sketch pad, mapping out ideas for businesses no one asked for. When I was 10, I started a little weekend stand in front of our house. Not just lemonade, but hand-painted mugs filled with lemonade sold at a markup that would make any entrepreneur proud. By 12, I was cleaning up old bicycles, repainting them, and selling them to kids in the next neighborhood over. I kept a notebook of every sale, every cost, every profit. To me, it was thrilling. To my parents, it was cute, but irrelevant. Olivia, my father would say at the dinner table, you need to put this energy into your studies. These little side projects are fine now, but they won't pay the bills when you grow up. He'd say it in front of everyone, as if my dreams were harmless games that would disappear once I got serious. I'd nod, but inside I felt the sting. Why did it have to be one or the other, books or business? Why couldn't it be both? By high school, the gap between me and my siblings grew wider. Michael was on his way to a top engineering program. Claire had a volleyball scholarship lined up. I had an online store selling handmade jewelry and embroidered tote bags. I'd learned to use basic coding to build my own website, managed customer orders, and reinvested every dollar I made. When I cleared my first 1,000 in profit, I was over the moon. My parents barely looked up from the evening news when I told them. Graduation was supposed to be the moment I joined the real path. I enrolled in community college, mostly to keep peace at home. I figured maybe I could stomach it for a couple of years while quietly working on my ideas. But after one semester, I knew I couldn't do it. The classes were outdated, the professors taught theory without ever having done the work themselves, and I felt like I was sitting in a cage. When I told my parents I wanted to leave school to focus on building a business, the argument lasted 3 days. My father's voice boomed through the walls. "You're going to throw your life away, Olivia? Do you want to be a dropout who works at the mall for minimum wage?" My mother tried to mediate, but she too believed I was making a terrible mistake. I left anyway. I was 19 with $2,000 in savings from odd jobs and online sales. I rented the cheapest studio apartment I could find, one where the radiator clanged all night and you didn't do laundry after dark. I stocked my pantry with instant noodles, jarred peanut butter, and whatever I could grab from the discount bin at the grocery store. Every day I worked until my eyes burned, juggling product sourcing, website design, marketing, and customer service. My first 3 ventures failed hard. The drop shipping project collapsed when my suppliers sent defective items. The social media management gig drained me because I charged too little and tried to handle too many clients. My handmade accessory line sold okay at local fairs, but couldn't scale enough to pay the rent. I cried a lot during those years, wondering if my father was right all along. But each failure was a crash course in the real business world. I learned how to negotiate contracts that actually protected me. I figured out supply chain pitfalls you'll never read in a textbook. I discovered how to handle customer complaints without losing them forever. And quietly, without any applause or approval, I was shaping the foundation for something bigger than I could explain at the dinner table. Back then, I still thought maybe if I made it big enough, my family would finally see me as more than the one who didn't follow the rules. I didn't know it yet, but that hope would be both my fuel and my undoing. By the time I hit 20, I had already learned what most people twice my age still didn't understand. Success doesn't come from one big win, it comes from surviving 100 small losses. But surviving doesn't mean you're thriving, and back then I was barely keeping my head above water. Rent was always a week late. My car had a habit of dying in the middle of intersections, and there were nights when dinner was a can of beans because I had to choose between food and shipping orders on time. It was in one of those low points that I crossed paths with someone who would change everything. Her name was Margaret Lee, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who had built and sold 3 companies in industries I barely understood. We met at a small business networking event I almost didn't attend because I couldn't afford the entry fee. The only reason I went was because a friend gave me her spare ticket saying, "Olivia, you never know who you might meet." Margaret was nothing like the people I'd grown up around. She didn't flinch when I told her I'd dropped out of college. In fact, she smiled. "Good," she said, sipping her black coffee. "Means you haven't had your instincts trained out of you yet." That was the first time anyone had framed my lack of a degree as an advantage. We met again the following week for lunch, and she asked me blunt questions no one had ever bothered to ask. "What's your profit margin? Who are your top 3 customer segments? What's stopping you from scaling?" I answered clumsily, but she listened without judgment. By the end of that lunch, she said, "You've got hustle, but hustle without structure burns out. Let's fix that." Over the next year, Margaret became my unofficial mentor. She taught me how to read financial statements like a second language, how to negotiate with suppliers so they respected me instead of seeing me as an easy mark, and how to price my products so that growth was sustainable. She didn't coddle me. If anything, she was tougher on me than any client had ever been. But she believed in me in a way my family never had. One afternoon, she handed me a folder across the table at our favorite diner. Inside was a detailed plan for a platform she thought I could build, an online marketplace that connected American artisans to customers who valued craftsmanship and local production. "The big guys are outsourcing everything overseas," she explained, "but there's a growing movement to buy domestic. You could be the bridge." It was like she'd read my mind. I'd been toying with the idea of working directly with makers instead of selling my own small batch products, but I didn't know how to structure it. With Margaret's guidance, I mapped out what would become American Artisan Collective. Launching wasn't glamorous. My apartment became a warehouse office and photography studio all at once. I slept on a futon shoved into the corner, surrounded by shelves of sample products and a desk buried under packing slips. My day started at 5 a.m. with emails to artisans and ended close to midnight after the last orders were boxed and labeled. The first breakthrough came when a lifestyle blogger with a huge following stumbled on one of our featured potters and wrote about it. Overnight, my inbox exploded. Orders poured in so fast that I had to temporarily shut the site down just to catch up. That week, I made $12,000 in sales, more money than I'd ever seen in my account. I remember calling my parents, my voice shaking with excitement. "Dad, I think this is really taking off," I told him. There was a pause, then his voice steady and dismissive. "That's nice, Olivia, but don't get ahead of yourself. These internet fads come and go. You can always go back to school when it's over." The words landed like a slap. I hung up feeling deflated, but it also lit a fuse. If he wasn't going to believe in me, I would make it impossible for him not to. I promised myself that the next time I told him about my business, it would be so undeniable he'd have no choice but to respect it. From that moment, my work took on a different kind of intensity. I wasn't just building for me anymore, I was building proof. Proof that the path I'd chosen wasn't reckless. Proof that resilience could outrun convention. Proof that I was worth more than the degree I didn't have. Of course, I didn't realize then that proving myself to someone who had already decided my worth was a losing game. But that's the thing about lessons, you often learn them only after the damage is done. The next 5 years felt like living inside a storm that never stopped moving, chaotic, loud, and strangely exhilarating. American Artisan Collective went from a handful of makers in 3 states to hundreds across the entire country. We represented blacksmiths in rural Pennsylvania, textile weavers in Arizona, furniture craftsmen in Vermont. Each story added another layer to the brand. Customers weren't just buying products, they were buying a piece of someone's history, someone's craft. But scaling that quickly was brutal. There were days when the website crashed under heavy traffic, leaving me on the phone with developers for 48 hours straight. Once during a holiday promotion, a server failure threatened to cost us nearly $200,000 in sales. I didn't sleep for 3 days, surviving on coffee and the stubborn refusal to watch everything collapse. I learned that growth could be as dangerous as failure. Orders outpaced inventory. Shipping costs doubled overnight. Artisans struggled to keep up with demand. I poured every dime back into the business, sometimes going months without paying myself. I even moved from my cramped studio to an even smaller 1-bedroom just to cut rent. It wasn't glamorous, but every sacrifice felt like a brick in the foundation of something that would last. By our 3rd year, we hit the milestone I'd dreamed of: $1 million in annual revenue. I celebrated alone in my office with a cheap bottle of champagne because the truth was, there was no one in my life who understood what that number meant, not really. I couldn't call my parents. They'd only respond with a muted, "That's nice," before changing the subject to my brother's latest work promotion or my sister's new house. Still, I helped them whenever they needed it. When my mother needed surgery that insurance wouldn't fully cover, I wired $60,000 directly to the hospital under an anonymous donor name. When my brother and his wife fell short on their down payment, I funneled $50,000 through a family friend, so they wouldn't know it was me. When my sister's wedding budget crumbled after her fiancé lost his job, I covered the $40,000 shortfall without blinking. Each time I told myself it didn't matter whether they knew. It was enough to know I'd done the right thing. But late at night, sitting in my quiet apartment, I'd catch myself imagining their faces if they ever found out: surprise, maybe gratitude, maybe even pride. And yet deep down, I suspected that pride was the one thing they might never offer me. The business kept growing. I hired my first 3 employees, bright, hungry, and just as scrappy as I was. Our office was a converted industrial space downtown, with exposed brick walls and a constant smell of sawdust from the woodworking shop next door. I loved that smell. It reminded me why we existed. Partnerships with major retailers started to appear on the horizon. We turned down 2 acquisition offers because selling would have meant losing control of the mission. I wasn't building just to cash out. I was building because it mattered. Through it all, my relationship with my family stayed surface level. I kept my visits short, conversations polite, and my business updates vague. Things are going well, I'd say, avoiding specifics. Sometimes I thought about being honest, about telling them the full scale of what I'd built. But then I'd hear my father's voice in my head: "It's just an online thing, Olivia. Don't get carried away," and I'd swallow the truth. Looking back, I realize I was living in 2 worlds. By day, I was the CEO making decisions that affected hundreds of people and millions of dollars. By night, I was still the daughter who avoided talking about her work at the dinner table. That split wasn't sustainable. And then came the moment that forced everything into the open. My father's 70th birthday was approaching, and I decided it was time to close the gap. I would tell them exactly what I'd built. I would give my parents a fully funded retirement account enough to let them live without worry for the rest of their lives. Not as a flex, not as revenge, but as proof that my way had worked. What I didn't realize was that the gift I thought would bridge the distance would end up burning it to the ground. The night of my father's 70th birthday felt like it was pulled straight from my childhood memories. Their house looked exactly the same. Same worn leather recliner in the living room, same family photos lining the hallway, same smell of pot roast drifting from the kitchen. The only new thing was the massive flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace, a Christmas gift from my brother that had been mentioned at least 3 times in the first half hour I was there. I had planned this moment carefully. The retirement account paperwork was tucked neatly in a cream-colored envelope inside my purse. My talking points, how the business had grown, what it meant to the artisans we worked with, and why I wanted to give them this gift were rehearsed so many times I could say them in my sleep. The evening started pleasantly enough. My mother gave me her usual polite hug and a quick comment about my haircut. My brother Michael arrived in pressed slacks, his wife in a tailored dress that seemed chosen to scream professional. My sister Claire came in buzzing about her latest promotion at the school district, already talking about how she might make principal by next year. Dinner conversation was the same loop it had always been: neighborhood gossip, kids' achievements, work updates from Michael and Claire. Not a single person asked how I was doing, and when I tried to chime in about a recent feature, one of our artisans got in a national magazine. My brother smoothly redirected the conversation back to his son's baseball stats. I waited until dessert. My mother's signature chocolate cake was being served. My heart was hammering, but I forced a calm smile. Dad, Mom. There's something I want to share with all of you, I began. American Artisan Collective was recently valued at $25 million. We have over 400 partner artisans now, and our team has grown to 38 full-time employees. I've been featured in Entrepreneur and Forbes this year. The silence was thick. My mother froze with her fork midair. Claire glanced quickly at her husband. Michael just stared at me. My father's voice broke the quiet, but it wasn't what I expected. What exactly does that mean, Olivia? These online businesses throw around big numbers all the time. Funny math if you ask me. I explained in simple terms: valuation, revenue streams, partnerships. But before I could finish, Michael leaned forward. So you got lucky. That's great, but some of us built real careers with actual qualifications. His eyes flicked to his wife, who nodded like they were both in on some private joke. It's not luck, I said evenly. It's years of 18-hour days, solving problems, and building something that matters. We've helped dozens of American craftspeople keep their businesses alive. My mother gave a tentative smile. That sounds nice, dear. I just wish you'd finished your degree. Education is important. I could feel my patience thinning, but I kept my voice steady. Actually, I brought something for you, Dad. I reached into my purse and handed him the envelope. This is a fully funded retirement account. You'll never have to worry about money again. He opened it, scanning the documents. Instead of gratitude, his face tightened. What is this supposed to be, charity? We didn't raise you to throw money around like you're better than everyone else. That's not my intention. I just wanted to help. Like I helped with Mom's surgery, Michael's house, and Claire's wedding. 3 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. My secret was out. My father's jaw clenched. Claire looked mortified. Michael's expression twisted into something ugly. You've been paying for things behind our backs, my father barked. Playing the big shot with your internet money. I was just trying to support the family, I said quietly. Michael's voice cut in sharp. Support. You made us feel like charity cases. Some of us work honest jobs with degrees, not get-rich-quick schemes. It's not a scheme. I built a legitimate business that employs dozens of people. My father slammed his napkin down. You dropped out against our advice, disappeared into your little online world, and now you think your money makes you part of this family? You're still uneducated trash who got lucky. The words hit like a punch. My mother gasped but didn't defend me. My brother smirked faintly. Claire looked down at her plate. I stood up, gathering my purse. I should go. Yes, you should, my father said. Get out of my house. I walked out into the cold night, the sound of my heels sharp against the driveway. No one followed. No one called my name. If you've ever had a moment where the people you've sacrificed for turned on, you tell me in the comments, because I want to know I'm not the only one who's been there. I drove away from my parents' house that night with my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the car in my lane. The streets of my hometown, once so familiar, blurred into a stream of headlights and stoplights. At one point, I had to pull over breathing hard just to keep from breaking down completely. The cruel irony was that I owned a multi-million-dollar company, yet I was spending the night in a hotel a few miles from where I grew up because my own family's door was no longer open to me. In the sterile quiet of that hotel room, I replayed every word from dinner like a slow-motion car crash. My father's face when he opened the envelope, Michael's smirk when my financial help was revealed, my mother's silence louder than anything she could have said, and the way Claire's eyes darted away instead of meeting mine. I'd gone in thinking this was the night I would finally earn their respect. Instead, it was the night they burned whatever bridge we had left. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I opened my laptop and started writing down every cent I'd given them over the years. The $60,000 for Mom's surgery, $50,000 for Michael's house, $40,000 for Claire's wedding, thousands more for my father's truck repair, my mother's kitchen remodel, Christmas gifts, emergencies, money sent quietly, never to be repaid. The total came close to $250,000, not counting the retirement account my father had just thrown back in my face. Around 1:00 a.m., my phone lit up with a text from Claire. Dad's still upset, but he'll get over it. You know how he gets when his authority is challenged. No apology. No acknowledgement of the words he'd used. Just an expectation that I'd accept the abuse and come back into the fold. I stared at the screen until it went dark, then set the phone face down. I didn't reply. The next morning, still hollow from lack of sleep, I called Dr. Barrett, a therapist I'd seen briefly years before when I was navigating my first round of burnout. She agreed to fit me in for a virtual session that afternoon. I told her everything from the cake at dessert to the look on my father's face. She listened without interruption until I was done. Then she said, "Olivia, family wounds cut the deepest, especially when they target the very thing you've worked hardest to overcome. Your success doesn't fit the story your family tells about the world, and that threatens the whole system." Over the next week, we unpacked it all. Dr. Barrett helped me see the patterns stretching back to childhood, how my entrepreneurial wins were minimized, while my siblings' academic achievements were celebrated. How success in my family had a single definition, and anything else was treated as lesser. She pointed out that my financial help, far from bringing us closer, may have deepened the rift because it shifted the unspoken power dynamics my parents depended on. It was painful, but it was also clarifying. I began to understand that no amount of achievement or generosity could buy the acceptance I'd been chasing. The person I wanted them to see, the woman who built something from nothing, who worked 18-hour days, who fought for every inch, was never going to fit into the mold they had for me. A week after the dinner, Claire called again. I let it go to voicemail. "Olivia, please call back. Dad feels bad about what happened. We all do. But you have to understand how it looked you coming in and showing off your money. It was insensitive to the rest of us who work hard for our careers." I deleted the message without responding. Then came a text from Michael. "Family is family. Let's move past this." Still no apology, just another subtle command to play my old role and swallow my hurt. 2 weeks later, I made the decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I was done trying to earn what they would never give. I would protect my own peace, even if it meant creating distance. The beach house I'd bought the year before in Monterey, California, was supposed to be a vacation rental, but it would now become my home. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and wrote a letter to my parents. I told them I loved them, but I could no longer participate in a relationship where my worth was measured by credentials instead of character. I told them I'd supported the family for years not to feel superior, but because I wanted them to thrive. And I told them that being called uneducated trash made it clear that no level of success would ever be enough in their eyes. I mailed the letter the next morning. No response came, and that silence, heavy as it was, made one thing certain: I had just closed a chapter of my life that would never be reopened the same way again. When the letter went unanswered, I knew the move to Monterey wasn't just about changing my address, it was about changing my life. I called my assistant Jenna and asked her to coordinate the logistics, pack my belongings in Kansas, ship what I wanted, donate the rest. I told her to keep only the things that held meaning: art from artisans we'd partnered with, a few books, my grandmother's quilt. The rest was just weight I didn't need to carry into my new life. Flying into California felt like stepping into a different universe. The Kansas winter had been a flat sheet of gray, but here the sky was impossibly blue, and the air carried a tang of salt from the Pacific. The beach house sat on a quiet stretch of coast, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the ocean like a living painting. I'd bought it a year earlier as an investment property furnished it for vacation rentals, but walking through it now, it felt impersonal. Beautiful, yes, but not mine. So I began the slow work of making it a home. The beige mass-produced decor went first, replaced with the work of the very artisans who built my business hand-woven rugs from Arizona ceramics from North Carolina, carved wood from Vermont. Every piece had a story, a maker, a heartbeat. The kitchen with its industrial appliances got splashes of color from pottery bowls and hand-dyed linens. The sterile luxury was gone. In its place was warmth, texture, and intention. My days took on a new rhythm. At sunrise, I walked barefoot along the shore, the cold sand grounding me, the ocean's pull reminding me that life moves in cycles, ebb, flow, retreat, return. I found a small cafe run by a Cuban-American family, and within a week they knew my name and my order. Working from the beach house was easier than I'd imagined. Video calls replaced office drop-ins. My leadership team handled day-to-day issues with a competence I was proud of. Without the constant drain of family tension, I found myself sharper, calmer, more decisive. A month in, Jenna and our operations director flew out for a 3-day strategy session. We worked from the deck, laptops open against the sound of crashing waves. On the last day, Marcus looked at me and said, "You seem lighter. Like you're leading without carrying someone else's judgment on your back." He was right. Still old habits die hard. When my phone lit up one Saturday with my brother's name, I hesitated. Against my better judgment, I answered. Michael's voice was warm, casual, almost rehearsed. "Nice place you've got here." He said his words laced with a whistle of approval as he looked out at the ocean through my living room windows. He hadn't called to catch up. Within minutes, he brought up an investment opportunity and asked if I could help fund it. I didn't flinch. "I'm not making loans to family anymore, Michael. That chapter's closed." His expression tightened. "So that's how it is. You move to your beach mansion and forget where you came from. Dad was right about you." I stayed steady. Dad called me uneducated trash and kicked me out of his house. "If you came here to echo that, you can leave." He backpedaled, muttering that Dad didn't mean it like that, but I'd heard enough. I walked him to the door, closed it behind him, and stood in the quiet. For the first time in years, I felt no guilt for saying no. That night, I poured a glass of wine, sat on my deck, and thought about how easily old patterns try to sneak back in. I knew then I needed to channel my energy into something that aligned with my values instead of repeating cycles that drained me. Within a week, I had my lawyer set up the Olivia Carter Entrepreneurship Scholarship at the community college I'd briefly attended. It would fund 5 students a year who showed entrepreneurial potential, but lacked the traditional advantages, full tuition, plus mentorship from real business owners. No GPA gatekeeping, no professors who'd never run a company lecturing from a textbook. Just people who'd built something guiding those who wanted to do the same. As I signed the final paperwork, I realized this was the kind of legacy I wanted. Not the quiet, thankless rescues that bred resentment, but open, intentional acts of support that could change lives without chaining me to their approval. If you've ever had to break a cycle for your own sanity, tell me in the comments, because that's the only way we learn we're not alone in it. And if this is resonating, hit that subscribe button so we can keep walking through these moments together. 3 weeks after I'd settled fully into Monterey life, something happened that would drag my name back into my old world, whether I wanted it or not. It started with a text from Eliza, a gallery owner I'd befriended in town. "Pick up the Monterey Business Journal. Page 3. You're going to want to see this." I ran to the corner shop, grabbed a copy, and there I was smiling on my deck with the Pacific behind me under the headline, "E-Commerce Innovator Brings Multi-Million-Dollar Enterprise to Monterey." The article was flattering, thorough, and most importantly, factually correct. They dug deep into American Artisan Collective's story from its humble start to its $25 million valuation, and even mentioned my new scholarship fund. I hadn't authorized the piece, but Eliza was quick to explain when I called her. "It's all public record property transfers, business registrations. Once they knew you were here, it was easy to connect the dots. And honestly, Olivia, it's a great story. People should know it." I shrugged it off at first until the story was picked up by larger outlets. Within a week, it was on LinkedIn, shared by business leaders I'd never met and reshared by people from my past. My inbox flooded with old classmates suddenly remembering me, teachers claiming they had always seen my potential, and strangers thanking me for proving that there are many paths to success. One former classmate wrote, "If you could build something so substantial without a degree, maybe my idea has a chance too." The irony hit hard when my hometown newspaper ran a condensed version of the article with the headline, "Local Entrepreneur Makes National Impact." The same community that had nodded along when my parents called me reckless was now celebrating me as their pride and joy. And then the inevitable happened. My family found out. The first sign was a friend request from my cousin, then another from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. The next day, my mother texted, "Saw the article about your company. Very impressive, dear. Dad and I are so proud." No acknowledgement of the birthday dinner. No mention of the words that had cut so deep. Just a casual claim of pride like the past had been erased. A voicemail from my father followed Amanda. He always slipped and called me by my middle name when trying to sound warm. "Big news about your company in the paper. Always knew you had it in you. There seems to have been a misunderstanding last time we spoke. Call me back when you can." A misunderstanding. That's what he called being told I was uneducated trash and ordered out of his house. 3 days later came another text from my mother. "We're thinking of visiting California next month. Would love to see your new place." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I scheduled an emergency session with Dr. Barrett. She laid out my options, plainly declined the visit, entirely allow it, but set firm boundaries or treat it as an opportunity for honest conversation if they were willing to acknowledge what happened. After a long night of thinking, I sent my mother a message. "You and Dad are welcome to visit, but we need to have an honest conversation about the birthday dinner before we can move forward. Please let me know if you're open to that kind of discussion." Her response was quick. "Of course, dear, we just want to put this behind us and be a family again." The phrasing sat wrong with me. Put this behind us sounded like skipping the work of repair and leaping straight to comfort. But I agreed on dates anyway. I decided they would stay in a hotel nearby, not my home. I needed my personal space intact. In the weeks leading up to their visit, I rehearsed conversations with Dr. Barrett, practicing how to keep my boundaries without getting defensive. I reminded myself over and over the goal wasn't to win them over, it was to stand my ground and protect my peace. I didn't know then if the visit would mend anything, but I knew one thing for certain this time. I wouldn't be walking into the room looking for their approval. I'd be walking in knowing exactly who I was, whether they could see it or not. The day my parents arrived in Monterey, the air carried that strange mix of anticipation and dread you feel before a storm. I had told myself all week that I was ready, that I could keep this meeting on my terms. Still, when I saw them step out of the black rental SUV in front of the hotel, my chest tightened in ways I thought I'd outgrown. My mother spotted me first. She waved with a smile too wide, the kind you wear when a camera is pointed at you. My father followed a step behind, his face calm but unreadable. We exchanged polite hugs, light, quick, the kind that barely touched the skin. Over coffee in the hotel's patio cafe, the first 20 minutes were harmless. We talked about Monterey's beauty, the seafood, the art scene. My father asked about the beach house like it was just another piece of property I'd bought, as if it wasn't the first home I'd chosen entirely for myself. It didn't take long before my mother leaned in, her tone soft, almost rehearsed. "Olivia, your father and I have been thinking. That night at your birthday dinner, it got out of hand. You know your father didn't mean what he said." I held her gaze. "I know exactly what he meant, and I know you both let it stand for months without an apology." My father cleared his throat. "We thought giving it space would help. People say things in anger, and people can choose to make it right," I replied. "You didn't." Silence stretched between us. My mother looked at her coffee cup. My father's jaw worked like he was weighing whether to push back or concede. Finally, he said, "We're here now, aren't we?" "That's not the same thing as being accountable," I said, my voice steady. "You can't show up for the good parts of my life without showing up for the hard conversations, too." My mother sighed, the kind of sigh that used to make me back down when I was younger. But I wasn't that girl anymore. To my surprise, my father nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "You're right. I was wrong to say what I said, and I'm sorry." The words weren't poetic, but they were plain, and they landed heavier than I expected. I looked at my mother. And you? She hesitated. I'm sorry I didn't speak up for you that night. It wasn't perfect, it didn't undo the hurt, but it was more than I thought I'd get. We moved the conversation forward, talking about the scholarship, the company, and how I'd built a home here. But I kept the boundaries clear. When they hinted at staying at my house next time, I smiled and said, "You'll always have a hotel recommendation from me." That evening, I invited them to a small dinner at a local restaurant. I'd arranged for a private table overlooking the ocean. As the sun dropped into the water, I realized I wasn't sitting there hoping for their approval anymore. I was offering them a seat at my table on my terms. After dinner, as we walked back toward their hotel, my father stopped. "You've done well, Olivia. More than I expected. Maybe more than I thought you were capable of. I was wrong about you." I didn't need his confession to validate me, but hearing it was like setting down a weight I'd carried for years. I know I said simply. Back at my own home later that night, I sat on the deck with a cup of tea watching the waves crash in the moonlight. My phone buzzed a message from Dr. Barrett. "Remember, progress isn't always reconciliation. Sometimes it's just leaving the table without losing yourself." She was right. This visit didn't mean we'd suddenly become a picture-perfect family. It meant I'd proven to myself that I could face them without bending to fit their version of me. And that I realized was more than enough. 2 days after my parents left Monterey, I thought I'd finally have the quiet, back the steady rhythm of mornings on the deck, afternoons in the studio, and evenings walking the shoreline. But trouble has a way of finding you once people realize you've stopped playing by their rules. It started with a call from my cousin Marla. We hadn't spoken in years, but her tone was sugary sweet. "Olivia, I've been meaning to reach out. I'm so inspired by what you've built. And, well, I have this little business idea. Just need some seed money to get it off the ground. It's practically guaranteed to succeed." I almost laughed. It was the exact kind of approach I used to fall for, couched in flattery vague, on details banking on my guilt. "Marla, I'm flattered you thought of me," I said, "but I'm not in a position to fund family ventures. I'm focused on the scholarship and my own projects." Her voice sharpened. "You'd really turn your back on family like that?" I didn't flinch. "I'm not turning my back. I'm setting boundaries." She hung up without another word. That night, an email from my brother landed in my inbox. He'd seen the articles too, and after a few lines of small talk, he got to the point. "The kids' school is raising tuition again. I thought maybe you could help just this once. In the past, I would have wired the money before breakfast. Now I typed out a simple reply, 'I'm not able to help with tuition. I'm sure you'll find a solution that works for your family.' Then I closed the laptop and went for a long walk, letting the salt air clear my head. The next week, the backlash began. My mother called her voice tight. "Your brother says you refused to help with the kids' school, after everything we've done for you." I stopped her there. "After everything I've done for you. And I'm not keeping score, but I am keeping boundaries. I can't be the safety net for every choice everyone makes. That's not sustainable, and it's not fair." She was silent for a long moment before muttering, "You've changed." "Yes," I said, "I have, and I'm not sorry." It was Dr. Barrett's voice in my head that kept me steady during those calls. She'd once told me, "When you stop being who people need you to be, they'll call it selfishness. But it's just you taking up your own space." Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. The guilt had been my oldest companion, almost comfortable in its weight. Letting it go felt like learning to walk without leaning on something. A week later, I got an invitation from the Monterey Chamber of Commerce to speak at their small business summit. The topic, "Building Without a Blueprint Success Outside the Traditional Path." Standing on that stage, looking out at a room full of entrepreneurs, artists, and dreamers, I told them the truth. About the rejection, the ridicule, and the nights I almost quit. About how success without support is possible, but it comes at a cost, and that cost is learning to stand on your own even when your knees shake. When I stepped down, a young woman approached me. "My parents told me I'd never make it without law school, but I've been running my own design studio for 3 years. Hearing your story, it makes me feel less alone." I realized then that maybe this was my real work now, not just running a business, but showing others that they didn't have to wait for permission to build their lives. That night, sitting on my deck with the waves crashing below, I thought about the old version of me, the one who would have bent, compromised, and paid any price for a scrap of approval. She was gone. And in her place was someone I actually liked. Someone who didn't just survive her family's dismissal, but who learned that her worth had never been theirs to grant in the first place. If you've ever been told you're not enough, maybe this is your reminder you already are. And if you felt that, drop a comment and share your own story. I promise someone out there needs to hear it. The week after the summit, I was sorting through the latest scholarship applications when an email from my father landed in my inbox. The subject line was blunt dinner. It caught me off guard. We hadn't seen each other since Monterey, and I assumed that visit had been the peak of whatever reconciliation was possible. Still, curiosity tugged at me. I replied with a simple when and where. He chose a quiet steakhouse in Kansas City, neutral ground halfway between his world and mine. When I arrived, he was already seated, a glass of bourbon in hand. His face looked older than I remembered, the lines deeper, the eyes tired. "Olivia," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Not a hug, not yet." We made small talk about the weather, the news, the usual safe topics. Then halfway through his steak, he set his fork down. "I've been thinking about what you said in Monterey, about showing up for the hard conversations." I waited. He took a breath. "You were right. I haven't been fair to you. Part of me resented that you didn't follow the path I thought was right. I told myself I was protecting you from failure, but really, I was protecting my own ego. And when you succeeded anyway, without my advice, without my blessing, it was easier to belittle it than admit I was wrong." The words felt heavy in the air, as if saying them had cost him something. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully, "but this isn't about me winning and you losing. It's about us being able to see each other clearly without those old filters." He nodded slowly. "I know, I don't want us to be strangers, Olivia." That admission cracked something in me I didn't know was still brittle. For years, I'd told myself I didn't care if he ever came around. But some small part of me had been waiting, maybe hoping for exactly this. "I don't want that either," I said. "But if we're going to rebuild anything, it has to be on equal ground. No more 'you're the disappointment' jokes. No more backhanded comments." He actually chuckled. "Fair enough." Then his face turned serious again. "And I need to apologize for something else. Your brother came to me after you told him no about the kids' tuition. I sided with him. I told your mother you were being selfish. That was wrong. You're right to draw lines. I see that now." That last part surprised me more than the first. My father wasn't the type to admit being wrong twice in one night. We finished dinner without tension, just a quiet sort of awareness that this might be the start of something different. When we said goodbye in the parking lot, he gave me a real hug, warm, unhurried. Driving back to my hotel, I thought about what Dr. Barrett had told me in one of our early sessions. Sometimes healing doesn't mean going back to how things were. It means building something entirely new from the scraps of what's left. The next morning, I found a small envelope slid under my hotel room door. No name, no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper with my father's handwriting. "I'm proud of you, not for what you've built, but for who you are. Dad." I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the words until they blurred. It wasn't a magic fix. Years of hurt don't vanish overnight, but it was real. And maybe for the first time, I believed him. That afternoon, I booked a flight back to Monterey, feeling lighter than I had in months. On the plane, I opened my laptop and added a new line to the scholarship mission statement: empowering those who build their own path even when the world tells them they're lost. Because I knew now it wasn't just about funding education. It was about giving people the courage to choose themselves, even when it meant walking alone for a while. If you've ever had to rebuild a relationship or yourself from the ground up, you know the quiet power in that choice. And if this resonates with you, share this story. Someone out there needs the reminder that it's never too late to start over. Back in Monterey, life settled into a slower, steadier rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on the deck, the Pacific stretching endlessly before me, and afternoons disappeared into the hum of the studio. For the first time in years, I wasn't moving out of urgency or reaction, I was building from a place of choice. One Thursday, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. The envelope was thick, the return address unfamiliar. Inside, a woman named Emily from Nebraska wrote that she'd seen my summit speech online. She had grown up in a family much like mine, controlling, dismissive of anything that didn't fit their vision, and had spent her 20s trying to earn their approval. She never got it. Her words trembled across the page. "Hearing your story, I realized I'm allowed to stop chasing them. I enrolled in a photography course next month. For the first time in years, I'm excited about something for me." I read her letter twice, then tucked it into a drawer with other notes. I'd started collecting small reminders that telling my truth had ripples far beyond my own shoreline. Around the same time, the scholarship committee sent me an update. Our first two recipients had completed their programs. One was opening a community health clinic in a rural town. The other had launched a sustainable clothing line. I felt a swell of pride, not the shallow kind that comes from being recognized, but the deeper kind that blooms when you see others flourish because you believed in them. But peace doesn't mean the absence of challenge. One evening, as the sun slipped low, I got a call from my mother. Her tone was almost casual. "Your father told me about dinner. Sounds like you two patched things up." "In a way," I said carefully. "Well," she continued, "since you're talking again, maybe you can convince him we should all do Christmas together this year. At the old house." I froze. The thought of going back there, of stepping into that same living room where so many careless words had been thrown at me, tightened my chest. "Mom, I appreciate the invite, but I'm not ready for that." Her voice sharpened. "Not ready or just holding a grudge?" I took a breath. Neither. I'm just not willing to pretend everything's fine for the sake of a holiday photo. That's not healing. That's performance. She sighed, the kind of sound that carried years of disappointment. "You've changed, Olivia. I'm not sure I like who you've become." "That's okay," I said quietly. "I like who I've become. And that's enough." We ended the call without resolution, but I didn't spiral the way I once would have. Instead, I went for a walk along the beach, letting the tide pull away the heaviness of her words. A few days later, I hosted a small gathering at my home, just friends, people who'd supported me without condition. We cooked together, laughed until our sides hurt, and as the night wound down, I realized something profound: family, as I'd always been told to understand, it was supposed to be unconditional. But here, in this warm room full of people who had no blood ties to me, I was experiencing the truest version of it. After they left, I stood in the quiet looking around my home. This space, this life, it was all built from the moment I decided to stop living for someone else's script. Before bed, I took out Emily's letter again. I wrote her back, telling her how proud I was that she'd taken that first step, and reminding her that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing in spite of it. The next morning, I sealed the envelope and thought about how strange it was, in trying to save myself, I had unknowingly started creating a map for others. If you've ever wondered whether your story matters, here's your proof. It might just be the lifeline someone else needs. And if you found your own courage in someone's words, share this with them. You never know the ripple you might start. Winter in Monterey has a quiet beauty mist curling over the water gulls, drifting in the cold air. The world softened to muted blues and grays. I found myself leaning into that stillness, letting it strip away the noise that had filled so much of my life before. One morning, while sorting through emails, I saw a name I hadn't expected: Nathan Carter, an old friend from college. We hadn't spoken in nearly 15 years. His message was short but deliberate. "Saw your interview about the scholarship. I think we should talk. Call me if you're willing." Curiosity outweighed hesitation. When I called, his voice was warm, tinged with nostalgia. He told me he was now a high school principal in Portland, working with students who were brilliant, but overlooked, much like the scholarship recipients I was supporting. "I've got a kid," he said, "who reminds me so much of you back then, quiet, determined, but always second-guessed. Her family wants her to give up on engineering because it's not for girls. She needs a lifeline. Would you meet her?" 2 weeks later, I was in Portland, sitting across from a shy 17-year-old named Jasmine in the school library. She barely met my eyes at first, but when I told her about my own battles for independence, her shoulders eased. "You don't have to wait for permission," I told her. "The people who doubt you will either catch up later or they won't. But their pace isn't your responsibility." By the end of our conversation, she had agreed to apply for the scholarship. As I hugged her goodbye, I thought about how many times I'd needed someone to say those exact words to me and never heard them. When I returned to Monterey, an email from Jasmine was waiting. She'd already started her application and attached sketches of an innovative bridge design she'd been working on. Her excitement was palpable, but life as always found a way to test my balance. A week later, my brother called something he rarely did. His voice was guarded. "Mom's upset you're not coming for Christmas. She says it's like you've abandoned the family." I felt that familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "I haven't abandoned anyone," I said. "I'm just choosing where I can be without shrinking." "She doesn't see it that way," he replied. "She thinks you're trying to prove something." "I'm not," I said firmly. "I've already proved it to myself. We ended the call politely, but the undercurrent of tension lingered. Old patterns die hard, and not everyone is ready for your growth. That night, I walked down to the beach. The waves were rougher than usual, crashing hard against the shore. It reminded me of the early days after I'd left, how loud everything had been in my mind, how impossible it had seemed to imagine a future not shaped by their approval. Now, standing there with the wind in my hair and my own home behind me, I realized something. I no longer feared their disapproval. I no longer built my life to avoid it. In January, Jasmine's application came through. It was thoughtful, bold, and entirely hers. The committee agreed she was awarded the scholarship. When I called to tell her, she burst into tears. "I won't waste this," she promised. After we hung up, I thought back to that day in the school library. How a single conversation had shifted her trajectory. How the chain of choices, mine included, had brought us here. Maybe that's the quiet truth of healing. You don't just rebuild yourself. You build pathways for others to walk more easily than you did. And if you're reading this, wondering whether you're ready to take that first step, know this: you don't have to feel ready. You just have to start. If this speaks to you, share it. Someone else is waiting for proof that the leap is worth it. February rolled in with a brisk ocean wind and the kind of golden sunsets that made you stop mid-sentence just to watch the sky shift colors. Life had become a blend of the steady and the surprising mornings filled with work on the Artisan Collective, afternoons mentoring new scholarship candidates, evenings walking the beach with a mug of tea. One Friday, I received an unexpected package. The handwriting on the label stopped me cold. It was my father's. Inside was a small wooden box I recognized instantly. It had belonged to my grandfather, a man I'd admired deeply, but lost when I was still in college. My father had kept it in his study for decades, refusing to let anyone touch it. Inside the box lay a pocket watch, tarnished, but still ticking faintly along with a folded letter. My hands trembled as I opened it. Olivia. I've been thinking about our last conversation. I know I've made you feel small. I can't change the years I did that, but I can tell you I was wrong. You built something from nothing, and I was too proud to see it. This watch was my father's. He gave it to me when I started my first job. I want you to have it, not because of what you've built, but because of who you are. Dad. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, the weight of the watch in my palm. It wasn't an apology wrapped in grand speeches, but it was the most unguarded thing he'd given me in years. The next week, I found myself back in Kansas, not for reconciliation, but for my own closure. I didn't go to the old house right away. Instead, I visited my grandfather's grave. I stood there with the watch in my pocket, telling him about the life I'd built, the people I'd helped, the parts of myself I'd reclaimed. When I finally knocked on my parents' door, my mother answered. Her eyes widened, surprised, maybe even a little relieved. "You came," she said softly. "I did," I replied, "but I'm not here to pretend nothing happened." She nodded and for once didn't try to argue. My father appeared in the hallway, the faintest hesitation in his step. "You got the watch," he said. "I did, thank you," I answered, holding his gaze. We talked for an hour. No shouting, no layered sarcasm, just two people acknowledging that bridges once burned take time to rebuild. I didn't leave with promises or dramatic reconciliations, but I did leave lighter. Back in Monterey, I shared the story of the watch at a small gathering with my scholarship team. One of the volunteers, a young man named Leo, said quietly, "Sometimes the most powerful change isn't in the words, it's in the gesture." That night, I kept the watch on my desk as I worked. It didn't erase the years of being dismissed, but it reminded me that even the most rigid hearts can shift if only slightly. And sometimes that's enough. A few days later, Jasmine sent me an email from her first week at an engineering program in Seattle. She'd attached photos of herself on campus, grinning ear to ear with the caption, "I'm here because you reminded me I could be." I realized then that my story was no longer just about what I'd overcome. It was about the chain reaction that happens when one person dares to step out of a shadow. If you've been holding on to bitterness, I'm not going to tell you to let it go. You get to decide when and if that moment comes. But I will tell you this. Sometimes the smallest sign of change can be the start of something bigger than you imagined. If this touched you, share it forward. Someone else might be waiting for their small sign. Spring came early that year in Monterey. The air was softer, the ocean calmer, and the streets began to fill with tourists, chasing the first warmth of the season. I found myself reflecting more often, not in the heavy, restless way I used to, but with a kind of steady gratitude that felt new. One Sunday morning, I hosted a small brunch at my home for the scholarship recipients who were in the area. It was nothing fancy, fresh pastries from the local bakery, fruit coffee, and the kind of conversation that doesn't need to be dressed up to feel rich. Jasmine was there along with two new awardees, and watching them trade stories about their classes, challenges, and dreams, I saw something that moved me more than I expected. They weren't just building their futures, they were building each other up. That was the piece I'd been missing in my own early journey community. I had clawed my way through alone, believing that self-reliance meant refusing help. But here, in my own living room, I saw the power of connection unfolding in real time. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat with a notebook and began sketching an idea, a mentorship network for scholarship recipients, pairing them with professionals in their chosen fields. Not just funding, but guidance. Not just opportunity, but a safety net. By summer, the idea had turned into a formal program. We called it the Bridge Project, a name that felt fitting for what it was meant to do: connect those on the edge of opportunity to the stability and confidence they needed to cross. Applications doubled in a month. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents remained cautious but civil. There were no dramatic reunions, no overnight transformations, but there were phone calls on birthdays and short updates shared without bitterness. It wasn't the fairy tale ending some might expect, but it was a peace I could live with. The watch from my grandfather stayed on my desk not as a trophy or proof of reconciliation, but as a quiet reminder of my own resilience. That little tick in the background while I worked became symbolic, the sound of time passing and of me choosing every day how to use it. In August, I flew to Seattle to visit Jasmine. She met me in the campus courtyard, her eyes bright, her confidence a far cry from the shy girl I'd met in the school library months before. She gave me a tour of her lab, introduced me to her professors, and at one point pulled me aside. "I used to think success was about making my family proud," she said. "Now I know it's about making myself proud and finding people who believe in me along the way." Her words echoed in my mind on the flight home. That had been my journey too, though it had taken me much longer to see it. And maybe that was the final lesson I'd been circling all along. You can't control who believes in you, but you can choose to believe in yourself and surround yourself with those who do the same. By fall, the Bridge Project had expanded to 3 states. Every time I met a new student, I saw a reflection of the person I had been and the person I had become. I realized I wasn't just telling my story anymore. I was helping write theirs. If you've made it to this point, maybe you see yourself in these words. Maybe you've been dismissed, underestimated, or pushed aside. Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me years ago. Your worth is not a negotiation. You don't have to buy acceptance with silence or sacrifice. And you certainly don't need to wait for permission to start living the life you want. This is where I'll leave my story for now, not because it's over, but because it's finally mine to write without anyone else's approval. If this journey resonated with you like this video, leave a comment and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You never know whose bridge you might help them cross. The ocean outside my window shimmered under the fading light waves, rolling in with a rhythm that felt like breathing. For the first time in years, my life wasn't defined by battles won or losses endured. It was defined by choice. I chose who stood beside me, where my energy went, and how I measured my own worth. The watch still sat on my desk, ticking softly, not as a reminder of my father's change, but of my own. I no longer waited for validation from those who couldn't give it. I had built my own table, and the people seated there believed in me without conditions. Jasmine's words stayed with me. Now I know it's about making myself proud. That was the truth I wanted to leave with anyone listening. Success isn't just the achievement, it's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you belong in your own story. So here's to everyone who's been underestimated, silenced, or told they weren't enough. Stand up, step forward, and write anyway. The life you want doesn't wait for permission, it waits for you. If this touched your heart, share it. Someone else might be waiting for the courage you just found.